Louise Vermilya, originally named Louisa Wolfe, entered the world in Cook County, Illinois. Her parents, Wilhelmina and John Wolfe, hailed from Prussia, making them immigrants to the United States. Among 5 sisters, she held the position of the eldest, and in the hierarchy of her 11 siblings, she ranked as the 3rd oldest. At the age of 16, she embarked on a new chapter by marrying Fred Brinkhamp, 24 years her senior, on April 2, 1885. Subsequently, she relocated to the charming village of Barrington, nestled within the Cuba Township of Lake County in northern Illinois. The series of homicides commenced in 1893 when Vermilya took the life of her initial spouse, Fred Brinkhamp. This dark incident occurred while they resided on their farm near Barrington, Illinois. The official cause of Brinkhamp's demise, as determined by the coroner, was a heart attack. In the aftermath of his passing, Louise Vermilya became the recipient of a substantial sum of $5,000 from a life insurance policy that Brinkhamp had, designating her as the beneficiary. Owing to the advanced age at which Brinkhamp met his end, no suspicions were aroused, as his demise was believed to be due to natural reasons. After Fred Brinkhamp's demise, he left behind 6 children. Tragically, 2 of his offspring encountered similar fates shortly after their father's passing. The first was Cora Brinkhamp, who passed away at the tender age of 8, followed by her younger sister Florence, who was 4.5 years old. Ian Blocks, the proprietor of a mortuary situated in Barrington, recollected his encounters with Louise Vermilya. He remembered her displaying an unusual fascination with working around deceased bodies. Despite not being officially employed by him, Vermilya exhibited an undeniable eagerness to assist in the mortuary. Blocks commented that for a span of a couple of years, he found it challenging to keep her away from his office. Whenever a death occurred, she seemed to be informed nearly as promptly as he was and would arrive at the location only slightly later than him. In 1906, Vermilya relocated to Chicago along with the children under her care. It was during her time in Chicago that she was involved in the demise of her stepdaughter, Lillian Brinkhamp, aged 26. However, the coroner's verdict attributed Lillian's passing to acute nephritis. The extraordinary frequency of deaths within the Brinkhamp family prompted suspicions of a curse. Around this juncture, Vermilya entered into a second marriage, tying the knot with Charles Vermilya, a 59-year-old man. 3 years later, Charles succumbed to a sudden ailment, bequeathing his widow $1,000 in cash and a residence located in Crystal Lake, Illinois, approximately 45 miles northwest of Chicago. Shortly after a dispute with Louise over the sale of the Crystal Lake estate, her stepson, Harry Vermilya, also passed away. Despite the chain of deaths, no suspicions arose at the time, and coincidental factors were held responsible. The following year, in 1910, Vermilya came into possession of $1,200 after the demise of her 23-year-old son, Frank Brinkhamp, born from her initial marriage. Frank, who had been previously married and divorced, received the sum as part of the divorce proceedings. On his deathbed, he confided his suspicions about his stepmother to his fiancée, Elizabeth Nolan, mentioning that he was following his father's path. Strangely, Vermilya's behavior took a dark turn as she began to poison acquaintances. One such instance involved Jason Rupert, a railroad fireman, who fell gravely ill after dining with Vermilya on January 15, 1910. He passed away 2 days later, marking the beginning of a series of fatalities among boarders in Vermilya's residence. In February 1910, Vermilya entered into matrimony with Richard Smith, a train conductor and a resident in her home. On March 11, 1910, just 2 days after partaking in a meal prepared by Vermilya, he suffered a fate similar to her prior boarder. The cause of his demise was identified as gastritis. At the time of his purported marriage to Vermilya, Smith was still legally married. His estranged wife held suspicions about the circumstances surrounding her husband's death. She entertained the belief that Smith might have been killed due to one of three potential motives: either Vermilya loved Smith and feared abandonment, or his wealth prompted foul play, or perhaps C. Poison. The undertaker, suspected of having romantic feelings for Vermilya, was driven by jealousy. While her motive in the preceding deaths of family members seemed tied to financial gains, her motivations became unclear following the demise of her boarders, as she derived no monetary benefit from those deaths. It wasn't until Arthur Bissonnette arrived at Vermilya's residence for a meal that her downfall began to unfold. In October 1911, during a dining occasion involving Arthur and his father, both Bissonnettes were struck by intense abdominal discomfort. This peculiar incident aroused the suspicion of homicide detectives, who commenced an inquiry. During questioning, Bissonnette's father reported a disturbing observation. He witnessed Vermilya sprinkling what he referred to as white pepper onto their meals before serving. This revelation prompted the Chicago Police Department to initiate an autopsy on Arthur Bissonnette's body, revealing conclusive evidence of arsenic poisoning. Subsequently, Vermilya was apprehended shortly after this revelation came to light. There exists some speculation regarding whether financial motives influenced Bissonnette's demise. With Vermilya's involvement, Arthur Bissonnette secured a position in the Home Guard, an organization resembling a militia, designed for men who failed to meet the qualifications for military service. In return for her assistance, Bissonnette was expected to compose a will that would designate Vermilya as the sole beneficiary of the insurance policy he would receive due to his Home Guard affiliation. In turn, Vermilya was to reciprocate by naming Bissonnette as the beneficiary of her life insurance policy following their marriage. Shortly before his passing, Bissonnette composed a will. However, he designated his fiancée, Lydia Rivard, residing nearby in Kankakee, as the beneficiary of his estate. Intriguingly, although Vermilya's signature appeared as a witness on the document, she vehemently denied any knowledge of having signed such a paper. On November 4, Vermilya found herself falling prey to her own methods and was swiftly transported to the hospital. Authorities revealed that since her house arrest on October 28, she had been consuming the same white pepper she had used on her victims. By November 9, her condition had deteriorated significantly, with the presence of underlying health issues such as valvular heart problems contributing to her declining state. Following a stay at the county hospital, she was discharged on November 24, 1911. However, by December 9, she suffered from paralysis, which medical professionals deemed permanent. Despite her ailment, Vermilya was mandated to attend all her court hearings, often utilizing a wheelchair for mobility. Her initial arraignment took place before Municipal Judge Walker on November 6, 1911, in connection to the death of Arthur Bissonnette. Subsequently, on March 7, 1912, a null proska was filed when it was discovered that Bissonnette had been consuming medication containing arsenic. In an attempt to streamline court proceedings, a conference occurred involving Judge Kirsten, Attorney Joseph R. Bars, and the prosecuting party. The prosecutor remained cautious about divulging the strongest points and motives related to Smith's death, stating, "There are several cases as to which Mrs. Vermilya may be tried, and I don't want to try her more than once. For that reason, I want to pick out the strongest one, and I have concluded that the Smith one is the strongest one." This led to Vermilya's rearrest and charges for the murder of Richard Smith. Post-mortem examinations conducted by Professor Walter S. Haynes, a chemist from Rush Medical College, confirmed traces of arsenic poisoning in Smith's liver. The autopsy findings revealed arsenic in sufficient quantities in the viscera of the two men to cause death. Subsequently, Vermilya was apprehended and confined in the county jail, where she made another suicide attempt. The trial commenced on March 21, 1912, extending over a span of 16 days. Following a mistrial, the case was resubmitted for trial 10 days later, ultimately resulting in another hung jury due to the largely circumstantial nature of the evidence. Further complexities emerged, exacerbating the progress of the trial. Jury selection posed difficulties, as many potential jurors grappled with their capacity to impose a death penalty on a woman with the same readiness as they would on a man. A significant number of prospective jurors had developed biases based on prevailing newspaper reports of the case. These biases had created an environment where impartial judgment was compromised. About 50% of those who made it past this initial screening exhibited a bias against circumstantial evidence, leading to their exclusion. This aspect of the jury composition, consisting entirely of men, not only grappled with the notion of sentencing a woman to death, but also raised questions about their general attitudes toward female defendants in murder cases. By October 12, 1912, Vermilya remained in custody alongside her fellow murderer Louise Lintloff, awaiting trial. Subsequently, on June 28, 1913, Vermilya was released on $5,000 bail due to concerns about her deteriorating health and exposure to the summer heat in a jail lacking air conditioning. This release was pending her trial for the poisoning of Richard Smith. On April 18, 1915, a discussion took place between Assistant State's Attorney Michael Sullivan and State Attorney Hoyne to deliberate on the trial's continuation. The conclusion reached was that securing a conviction on the Smith indictment would prove insurmountable. Sullivan commented, "We could only foresee that another trial would come with a substantial cost and no guarantee of presenting compelling evidence." Responding to Vermilya's lawyer's request, all charges were ultimately dismissed. Subsequent to the dismissal of charges, Vermilya retreated into a quiet existence, with no further mentions of her in local newspapers beyond this juncture. It is estimated that Vermilya accumulated a total of $15,000 from the 9 deaths.